Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome back to another episode of the Mysticism Decoded podcast. I am your host, Aleph Lev. In this episode, we are continuing on with the analysis and assessment of the gateway process. And this is an extremely important episode. We are up to section 30, titled Advanced Techniques. And we are about to start seeing what are some of the practical applications of being able to go into an out-of-body state, into these different, what Monroe Institute calls focus levels, where the higher up you go into the focus levels, you are able to perform, let's call it, more godlike magic. And the reason that this episode is so important is because we are coming to the section that I've been talking to you guys about for a little while now, and that is patterning and its involvement in the creation of the Golem, what people think is a mythical folklore figure from the Bible, yet it is 100% unequivocally real, and we'll be getting to that shortly. The section prior to that, titled Problem Solving, also very important, and I'm going to make a connection for you guys to Albert Einstein, who was famously known for playing the violin. Well, what was he actually doing while playing the violin? What was that helping him do? So let's get right into it. Section 30, Advanced Techniques. Having reached focus 10, the participant is now ready to endeavor to achieve a state of sufficiently expanded awareness to begin actually interacting with dimensions beyond those associated with his experience of physical reality. So this is something we've already touched on, being able to interact with the consciousnesses in intervening dimensions past the first 4 dimensions of time-space. And we know that we do this by accelerating our vibrations to past what is known as Planck's distance of 10 to the negative 33 centimeters. You can catch up on this in the prior videos in this series. This state is called Focus 12 and involves conscious efforts on his part, while additional forms of pink and white noise enter the sound stream being directed into his ears from the gateway tape. Once the participant has achieved this state of greatly expanded awareness, he is ready to begin employing a series of specific techniques or tools, as the Monroe Institute characterizes them, which enable him to manipulate, let's keep this word in mind, manipulate, his newly found expanded awareness to obtain practical, useful feedback of value for promoting self-discovery and personal growth. The specific techniques involved are described individually below. Now, in the rest of section 30, we have a number of specific tools, specific applications that higher focus levels allow for. And now we are getting into the realm of what can only be described as magic, sorcery, what they have called in modern parlance as witchcraft. It doesn't necessarily use those words here, but whenever you translate them properly, like I'm about to do for you, you are about to understand what these concepts of magic and witchcraft and sorcery, as they were described in biblical times, ancient times, when they were described as real, so real For example, keep in mind that in the Torah, the Old Testament, the Bible, there is literally a law in the Torah that bans women from participating in witchcraft. So just think about what that means for a moment. You don't need a law to ban someone from doing something if that something is not real. It was not a debate as to whether or not if witchcraft was real in ancient biblical times. It was understood collectively that it was real. It was practiced extensively by the population, at least to the point where a specific law needs to be stated, documented, written, and even put into the Torah that women were not allowed to participate in this type of magic, this type of witchcraft. Now, why are women not allowed and men are? Obviously, if you take a honest intellectual look at the Bible, as much as we love the Bible and our ancient texts, and certainly I do, we can understand that there is more than a hint of misogyny in these works. Now, are there other reasons besides misogyny that they had in the biblical times that brought them to this decision? I cannot say. However, we know that it is in the Torah, women are not to participate in witchcraft. Do not suffer a witch to live. It goes as far as stating that if a woman is caught participating in this type of magic, this type of witchcraft, she is to be murdered. It literally says this in the Torah, in the Bible, in the Old Testament. It says, do not suffer a witch to live. If a female is participating in these acts, she is to be put to death. She will die. That's how real this is. So whenever I'm about to explain to you in patterning in just a moment how it applies to the creation of a golem, which if someone has heard of it, which many people have not because they aren't really familiar with the ins and outs of the Old Testament, they will say that this is a mythical folklore figure, and I'm going to show you that's not the case, and I am providing further evidence for which by telling you that it literally says in the Torah that women are not to participate in these acts of magic, and if they are caught doing so, they need to be put to death. Not my words, not my laws. It is literally in the Torah. Do not suffer a witch to live. Okay, so that's the introduction for patterning, but we will be getting into that after section A, problem solving. And this is also a very important section. It's just that patterning for me is of particular great importance because the book that I wrote, Connect to Source, that connects this document with the first book of Kabbalah, which is titled the Sefer Yetzirah in Hebrew, the Book of Creation in English, the only book to ever be attributed to be written by Abraham, the patriarch Abraham, talks about two things. Mainly, A, the genesis of the universe. B, it is an instruction manual for creating the golem. And what I do is I tie it back to this document to explain what is written in poetic, enigmatic, ancient Hebrew and translate it into modern English with these modern scientific theories that are provided to us. And again, if you missed my earlier pods, which I'm sure many of you have that are watching my videos for the first time, this document was written by Lieutenant Wayne McDonnell, but in concert with Israeli scientist Yitzhak Bentov. And Yitzhak Bentov, he wrote 2 books that this document is really based on. Well, one was published prior, one was published post, but the 2 books are from the late 70s, early 80s, Stalking the Wild Pendulum and A Cosmic Book, which is why he was sought out to help assist with this document, which was really put together, not even for what I just described to you, but what we'll get to shortly, section E, remote viewing, which not only was, but still is, a government psychic spying program where it was on the public ledger for 30 plus years until, quote unquote, oh, this doesn't work anymore. So it was just taking in-house black ops. But obviously it does still work. If anyone believes that, hit me up. Got a bridge to sell you. But the other thing about it is that this is a repeatable science. It's a repeatable esoteric science. Anyone is capable of doing this. Anyone is capable of remote viewing. It just takes practice. It is a skill, just like playing basketball and having a good jump shot is a skill. Some people are going to be naturally blessed at it. It's going to come easy to them. They're going to be a sharpshooter like the chef, Steph Curry. And other people, well, they're not going to be such great jump shooters. Take Shaq, for example. Although I like Shaq, so I don't mean to take a shot. But some people are going to be naturally gifted. It's going to come easy, and they're going to be able to expand their skill dramatically very quickly. Whereas other people, they're not going to be so good at it. But I submit to you, anyone is capable, and as such, this is a repeatable science. Okay, without further ado, section A of Advanced Techniques, problem solving. This technique involves identifying fundamental problems which the individual wishes to see solved, filling his expanded awareness with his perception of these problems, and then projecting them out into the universe. So essentially, any question that you want answered, you can have answered. In this way, the individual enlists the assistance of what Monroe Institute calls his higher self. In other words, his expanded consciousness, to interact with the universal hologram to obtain the information required to solve the problem. So what this is actually describing is expanding your consciousness to enlist your higher self, your expanded awareness that essentially is the part of you who still exists in the void that is merged with that God consciousness, to be able to yield the answers to any question you may have. This approach may be used to solve personal difficulties, technical problems in the realm of physics and math, and we'll connect this to Albert Einstein in just a moment, practical administrative problems, and so on. Responses to the problem-solving technique may be received almost immediately, but often they come based on developing intuition over the next 2 to 3 days. Frequently, the response comes in the form of a sudden, holistic perception in which the individual suddenly finds that he simply knows the answer in all of its ramifications and completely in context, sometimes without even being able to put his newly found perception into words, at least initially. In some cases, the response may even arrive in the form of visual symbols, which the individual will see with his mind while he is in the focus 12 state. and which he will have to interpret after he returns to normal consciousness. So I want to give an example regarding Albert Einstein and what he was famously known for, which was playing the violin to go into deep states of thought. Now, we talk about in this document being able to go into focus 12, and we're talking about doing it via transcendental meditation. But one of the things I believe I've come to understand in the last 2 years, after having started with this document and researching other roads and angles related to it, is that a lot of what we talk about is possible in the transcendental meditative state may also be possible while not in the transcendental meditative state specifically, but simply as a result of being in extremely deep focus. So Albert Einstein, he loved playing the violin. Whenever he needed to go into deep concentration, deep focused thought, very, very intense thought, so that he can ponder and come up with resolutions to his thought exercises and programs, we know that he used the violin to help him get into that state. Now, it's also possible that Albert Einstein was actually a meditator, and it is just essentially unknown and it's unreported. We're talking about the 1920s. It wasn't necessarily something that was mainstream to talk about. It was more esoteric, but it wouldn't shock me if Albert Einstein also meditated. But essentially, the way he used the violin to get into deep states of focus is still a form of meditation. I've never played the violin, but it sounds pretty interesting, and I'm actually considering it now. But you can get into deep states of focus in whatever way that works for you. For me personally, what works for me is walking around or really pacing and listening to usually electronic or EDM music, and especially if perhaps you take a hit or two of what I prefer as indica marijuana or indica leaning marijuana. And I'll give you another pro tip on top of that as well. If you eat a date, a nice juicy medjool date, which I recommend pitted, so you don't have to deal with the pit. But if you eat a big juicy date and then smoke weed, indica recommended, and then you start pacing and walking around while listening to your favorite music that helps you get into that flow state, or whatever type of music you might listen to when you work out. For me, usually it's EDM, sometimes rap, but EDM usually. This can also help you get into a certain state of consciousness where answers will come to you. And I'm telling you this, my personal anecdote, because this has worked for me, where I have had this holistic intuition that the document talks about, where answers on questions that I have pondered for a long time suddenly became known to me. And I was not meditating exactly. I was doing what I just described to you. I was walking around in a deep state of focus after having a date and taking a couple of hits of 702 Headband by Boulevard, which is currently my favorite strain. And a very important answer to a question that I had been pondering for really months, it just came to me. It just came to me, and just like the document says, you just know it. And you know the basically post-game breakdown. You know the ramifications. You know even the motivations. So everything comes to you with the answer. It's a full package. So this document, it talks about doing it in a focus 12 state of meditation, but I believe it can also be done in a waking state of deep focus, which I submit to you I've personally done. I gave you my anecdote, but this is what we are to understand from Albert Einstein and his violin playing as well. And we know that Albert Einstein, he came up with a lot of his best concepts by just doing these thought exercises while in, we can call it a flow state. And it is reported and not denied either, by the way, so we just know this, that he got into his flow state often by playing the violin. It could be an even better technique than what I just gave you. Maybe the certain sounds and frequencies that are emitted by the violin are able to wake your consciousness and connect neurons in a way that dates and weed cannot, although that essentially does the same thing. And there are other things you can do to help yourself as well. There's the entire esoteric niche of holistic medicine known as nootropics, which are essentially brain enhancers. Think of the movie Limitless, for example, with Bradley Cooper, when he takes a pill and he is super smart. We kind of have things that are really like that, and I should and will do a video on nootropics in the future. I've played around with them quite a bit. I've spent a few years playing around with nootropics, having spent thousands of dollars, different dosages, this and that. So I know which nootropics have worked for me. One of my favorite being actually L-theanine. L-theanine is an amino acid that it is found in green tea. That's where most people might have heard L-theanine from. It's the thing in green tea that basically helps you to chill and focus. But you can take that as a supplement in higher doses, more concentrated, and essentially it becomes meditation in a pill. And it's also extremely, extremely safe. So you can actually take relatively large doses without fear of consequence. And people that know about this, they do use it for that. So people that are deep meditators use L-theanine to even heighten their meditation. But I'll do a video in the future covering my entire nootropic experience. I'll lay out for you guys what worked for me, what didn't work for me. Well, it's not that nothing doesn't work. It's just that some things I like better than others. And I particularly have a little bit of a condition that I can't really use all of them due to it, but L-theanine is basically my favorite one that I can still use, and I do still use. So that'll be a random video in the future that I do for you guys. But problem solving is one of the most practical aspects of these advanced techniques, and as we can see, we're about to get into high strangeness, what those who are opposed to the science of magic refer to as witchcraft, sorcery, black magic, things of the nature. But the ever important section, patterning. As we read this section, I will tie it back for you to the Golem. But let's start reading the section now. This technique involves use of the consciousness to achieve desired objectives in the physical, let's remember this word, in the physical, emotional, and intellectual sphere. It involves concentration on the desired objective while in a focus 12 state, extension of the individual's perception of that objective into the whole expanded consciousness, meaning you are imagining what you want to bring into the physical reality, into the shared universal consciousness, and its projection into the universe with the intention that the desired objective is already a matter of established achievement, meaning you need to focus on it and believe it as if it already exists, which is destined to be realized within the time frame specified. So this first sentence, what this is saying is you can bring things into the physical reality by focusing on it with the right amount of concentration in the correct, what I've referred to as out-of-body state in the past, but I am now beginning to believe it can also be done while in body. And imagining it that it already exists in the shared universal consciousness. And it can be yielded in a specific time frame. So essentially we are talking about instant manifestation. That is why it is worded like this, time frame specified. It is talking about instant manifestation in the physical realm. So instant manifestation in the physical realm, meaning it does not exist in the physical realm prior to you employing what is called here as patterning. And that is why it says within the time frame specified. So if you're going to be engaging in this, you're not setting up a long-term manifestation to bring in a certain physical object. Oh, I want to manifest a diamond, but not for 3 weeks. It is talking about manifestation instantly. And it is being worded this way as to not freak the fuck out the commander that this is being written to. But just understand this first portion of patterning. This is describing what you have been told is black magic, what you have been told is witchcraft, what you have been told is sorcery, what you have been told is not possible, is not real, is sci-fi. It is sitting in front of you right now, highlighted in this CIA document. And understand that anything can be manifested. I just gave you an example of a diamond, but obviously the golem is what's of particular importance that we're going to talk about, being that it is written of in the Torah and the other books of Jewish commentary, the Talmud and the Gemara. And we have many stories regarding the golem, that it was created for either security, to be a spouse for the creator, literally a sex partner. And as I mentioned on one of the previous pods as well, Mary Shelley, the story of Frankenstein. Frankenstein is based on the story of the golem. No one knows this. Frankenstein is based on the golem. Mary Shelley knows this. Maybe some other people know this, but not many people know this. All right, let's continue. This particular methodology is based on the belief that the thought patterns generated by our consciousness in a state of expanded awareness create holograms which represent the situation we desire to bring about, and in doing so, establish the basis for actual realization of that goal. So again, this statement is reinforcing what I just said to you, and it is explaining it a little bit further. So what we are doing is our thought patterns that are being created by our consciousness, but those thought patterns being created by our consciousness is creating a hologram. We know this. We talked about this prior. We are confined energy, where God is unconfined energy, or energy in infinity, energy in a state of infinity. As such, energy in a state of infinity cannot produce a hologram, but it can perceive one. But we, as confined energy, are able to produce a hologram. And this is what we are doing with this section, this methodology called patterning. We are creating a thought hologram, and we are basically embedding the hologram we create with our consciousness into the universal hologram, the universal consciousness. So that is what it is explaining here, is that you are creating a thought hologram while in this heightened state where you are vibrating quickly enough to the point that you have reached what they are calling here as focus 12. Even in my book, I refer to this as an out-of-body state because I was going really off how the document describes it. But I am now essentially 100% certain that this can also be done while in body. And it is just a nuance of interpretation that the document either left out or it was a gray area. But you are essentially in a high enough vibratory state that you are creating a thought hologram of your own, which can now be embedded and included in the universal hologram, the universal consciousness. So think of it like a computer where you are injecting your own computer code into code that already exists, and now you are modifying the software. That is simply exactly what it is. Imagine the universal consciousness as a software program, and you are an individual hacker, and you are injecting your own code to modify the universal consciousness software. And when you inject your own code, you are literally manifesting and realizing this in the physical, because you have altered the universal consciousness with your own hologram. Once the thought-generated hologram of the sought-after objective is established in the universe, it becomes an aspect of reality which interacts with the universal hologram to bring about the desired objective, which might not, under other circumstances, ever occur. So this is what I just explained to you guys. You, as an individual hacker, as an individual software programmer in a way, are injecting your own code. Your code is your own thought hologram produced by your consciousness that is being injected into the universal thought hologram, the universal consciousness. And once it is embedded, what you had wanted to bring into physical reality is now there in physical reality. So whether you want to bring a diamond, whether you want to bring in, let's say, a throne, a chair, a crown, a sword, a plant, whatever, you can bring in anything to really just knock your socks off if you're a little woozy right now and haven't been able to fully grasp what I'm saying to you. And I don't mean to fearmonger, but I just want to really drive home the extent to which that this can be thought of. If you've watched the show Stranger Things on Netflix, and you are familiar with the Demogorgon, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. I think it was Demogorgon. You can manifest a monster. You can bring a Demogorgon into reality. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because if you know the lore behind the Philadelphia experiment and the related Montauk Project, those government programs, which we will cover in depth in future pods, part of the Montauk Project lore is what is known as the Montauk Chair. And this is also the motivation for Stranger Things as well, with 11, where she has essentially been confined to a certain part of a certain base to perform certain acts. But basically, the Montauk Chair was used in the Montauk Project for this exact methodology of patterning to bring thought holograms into existence. Now, in the Montauk Chair program, at first they were experimenting with things literally such as chairs. That's why I brought up that example. But there's also a lore that one of the individuals named Cameron Duncan, who was the main individual being used to experiment with the Montauk Chair, had soured on the project and thought it evil and wanted to destroy it. And it is reported in the lore by his brother, Edward Cameron, aka Al Bielek, that Cameron brought in a monster into reality, something that he envisaged as Bigfoot. And Bigfoot literally came in and created damage. And essentially the Montauk Chair had to be destroyed in order to prevent this Bigfoot from continuing on. And as sci-fi as it sounds, it is reported and was even reportedly caught on camera that once the chair was destroyed, the monster essentially froze in time-space. Now let me explain the Montauk Chair a little bit further and tie it back to patterning, because I know this all sounds like sci-fi, but we're also going to tie this back to the Golem. So I submit to you that this is 100% real. As unbelievable as it sounds, I am giving you the scientific principles. And keep in mind, as I've stated in prior pods, our reality is God's imagination crystallized and come to life, where God is infinite energy, and anything that is not infinite energy is simply confined energy. So just like you understand anything can happen in a computer simulation, anything can happen in our reality, because it is equivalent to a computer simulation, but it is God's consciousness, God's imagination, crystallized and come to manifest physical density. And the world, the universe, it is not stranger than you imagine. The universe is stranger than you can imagine, and that is a big difference. But the Montauk Chair, this was a device that was essentially created to enhance brain power. It was created to amplify your brain waves, or essentially your belief. Another way to state it is it was a chair that helps you reach these deep states of focus by amplifying your brain waves, your brain power, without being a expert meditator, because it is using technology and equipment to amplify your brain power and to essentially assist in bringing your individual thought holograms into the universal hologram. So this is what the Montauk Chair is described as and what it was created for. Cameron Duncan, who is the main experimentee, was put in the chair. He was hooked up to this equipment that was designed to amplify his brain waves. And essentially, when your brain waves are high enough, as it is being described right here in this CIA document, you are able to manifest. And in this particular case, we are talking about instant manifestation. That is what it is referring to, where it says it within the time frame specified, instantly. So in the Montauk Chair, hooked up to this equipment to amplify your brain waves, to have your thought holograms be powerful enough that they are embedded and injected into the universal hologram, the universal consciousness, Cameron was put in a position to have his thoughts come into reality physically, instantly. Now, as his brother, Ed Cameron, who later became known as Al Bielek, who I will do a complete series on in the future for just him and his story, is a major whistleblower from the Philadelphia experiment and related Montauk Project. And he is the one to give us this information about the Montauk Chair and his brother. And as he reported, the chair was initially created for scientific experimentation. There was ET involvement. This is the Montauk Project. It is known for ET involvement. There was ET involvement. It was a joint project between ET's several races or species and humans. And at first, they experimented with bringing things such as a chair into this reality. Al Bielek reported that they wanted to know if they can essentially produce a thought hologram, send it through a black hole, aka a wormhole, aka a time tunnel, and have the thought hologram come out on the other side. He actually said that they realized that is not efficient or necessary, and they gave up on that. But Cameron Duncan soured on this entire experiment and thought it to be evil. And on his own reconnaissance, it is reported by Al Bielek that Cameron essentially manifested a monster to come into reality to destroy the area, essentially just cause physical damage to anything and everything in the vicinity. And in Cameron's mind, the best monster he could essentially think of was a Bigfoot type thing. And it is reported that a Bigfoot monster was brought into the reality. It was imbued with the instruction to create violence and damage, as so it did. And the only way it was able to be eliminated was by destroying the machinery that was connected to Cameron. And it is reported that upon the destruction of that machinery, the monster essentially froze in time space and was even captured on camera frozen in time space, which allegedly exists still somewhere, someplace, that tape. Al Bielek, I believe he even produced a still photo of such, but it was rather blurry from the one that I saw. But the reason why this story is so applicable is because this idea of manifesting a monster, in this particular case of the Montauk Project, is exactly analogous to the Golem. So now let's talk about the Golem in a little more detail. As I described in prior pods, if you did not hear it, what is a golem? So a golem, first of all, where do we hear of the golem? The golem is talked of in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in the Torah. It is also described in books of Jewish commentary, such as the Talmud and Gemara. And the golem, it is described as a humanoid automaton which is soulless and brought forth from the ether, from the nothingness. So basically, a human brought forth from the nothingness of ether, of air, of time space, who does not possess a soul in the same way we as a human being possess a soul, a naturally born human being, yet it retains the ability to perform instruction and execute instruction. And how can it do this if it does not have a soul? Because we talked about in prior pod, section 26, quality of consciousness, that the body has its own consciousness separate from the consciousness of the spirit, which is superior and generally governs the body. So in stories of the golem from the Torah and Gemara and Talmud, we know that it was brought in for a specific task, depending on its creator. In some cases, it was literally brought in to be a security guard for a community. In other instances, it was brought in to be a literal spouse, a sex partner for the creator. And in other stories, we know that it comes in and immediately attacks its creator on its own reconnaissance. And this gets into the concept of the consciousness of the body is inclined to be evil and wicked, which I touched on in the past, but I'll be getting into more detail in the future. But in conclusion, we are to understand that the body has its own consciousness, which is a sophisticated consciousness that is capable of performing task and instruction. Yet it does not have a soul like a naturally born human does. As such, we refer to it as a soulless humanoid automaton brought forth from the ether. And it is in some ways very similar to this monster from the Montauk Project that was brought in by Cameron Duncan. But the golem, as I mentioned, is described in the Torah and Talmud and Gemara. But it is only in the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, the first book of Kabbalah, the book in which I compared the CIA document to, where we are given instruction as to how to create a golem. Now, I want to save the specifics of how to create the golem for the next series when I start covering my book, Connect to Source. But to touch on its scientific method, it is this section called patterning. And essentially we are understanding it is creating a thought hologram that gets in your individual thought hologram, which becomes embedded in the universal hologram. And in the Sefer Yetzirah, it provides instruction because there's no high-tech equipment involved there. It is by this method of higher states of consciousness naturally via transcendental meditation or similar, where certain sounds need to be uttered in certain combinations. This is what is actually described in the Yetzirah, which we'll get into detail when I start covering that aspect, that part of my book in future series. But this is the main overarching scientific principle. It is a confined energy pattern, aka you, your consciousness, creating its own thought hologram. And if you do so while in the proper high vibratory state, which this document describes as an out-of-body state, but I am now altering my interpretation to include that it can be done while in body as well, that it just matters how quickly you are vibrating. But when you are in the proper state, high enough vibration, you could bring that thought hologram into the universal hologram, essentially injecting your software into the universal software. And you could bring that thought into reality. You can manifest it instantly. That is what this entire section is about. So the golem, you can see, is analogous to the stories we hear of the Montauk Project and the manifested monster of the Montauk Project. And not to fearmonger, but literally the show Stranger Things is based in large part on the Montauk Project, and the weird things that are going on in the show Stranger Things at those weird bases is based on the Montauk Chair, the experimentation going on there. And the Demigorgon I am telling you, I'm submitting to you, is somewhat based on this idea or this lore of the Montauk monster brought in from Cameron Duncan. So the showrunners, the writers of the show Stranger Things, they are highly familiar with the Montauk Project, and they are likely highly familiar with Kabbalah and Kabbalistic principles. They are probably familiar even with the Sefer Yetzirah and the Golem, and they are probably even familiar with this section of the gateway process known as patterning. Now, I wanted to give you a good scientific principle and overview of the Golem and why it's real and why the Montauk Chair and the Montauk Project and Montauk Monster are real. But I want to save the exact specifics of creating the Golem for the next series whenever I get up to that point in covering my book. But of course, if you don't want to wait, I would love for you to and encourage you to buy my book. The link is in the all links in my description. It's available on Amazon in all forms and audiobook as well. I purposely kept the price very affordable. I want this to be information that is easily accessed. And what I have just described to you in this section, patterning, whether you believe it or not, this is top 1% of information in the entire world that only the top 1% of black ops is aware of, maybe the 0.1 of the 1%. And even in the entire history of humanity, this is extremely rare and unknown and not understood knowledge. No one knows what the golem is in mainstream science. It is not talked about. It is thought of as mythical folklore, which I just explained to you it is not. But even in the ancient biblical times where, yes, it was more prevalent, where we have stories of rabbis creating a golem, we have stories of women participating in witchcraft extensively enough that a law needed to be put on the books that they are not to participate and also should be killed for participating. But even then, it could not have been known specifically by the entire population as to the truth and reality of the golem, of this black magic, of this sorcery, of this witchcraft. But those words that I just used to describe this, it's a negative connotation, but it doesn't necessarily need to be, because all it really is a manipulation of energy, a manipulation of atoms. That is what we are doing. That is what we are talking about. We are manipulating atoms with our consciousness, and we are producing via sound and frequency. And as it is discussed in the Yetzirah, the universe was created with essentially light radiation and sound or frequency. And it is the same thing that that patterning is describing. And I was once asked by someone that I was talking to about this, well, what would a golem look like as it came into the universe? Essentially what you would see, and Yitzhak Bentov talks about this in his second book, A Cosmic Book. He doesn't talk about it in relation to the golem specifically, but he touches around it. And essentially, as you uttered these sounds and these frequencies while in the proper high vibratory state, capable of creation, you would begin to see an outline of a light being. So essentially, you would see light, an outline of light at first. And as you are uttering the sounds and as it crystallizes and becomes more dense and physical, you will see it go from a light outline into ultimately the physical manifest creation that you desired. So I just wanted to explain that to you as well, that it would come into this universe as a light being, light outline at first until it is crystallized. And we understand that our astral body as well is also described as our light body, L-I-G-H-T. And we see this in the Bible as well. I gave a specific example that I don't remember the quote off the top of my head, but I gave that example in my book. So that's basically the short version of the creation of the golem and how it would come into this world, essentially initially as a light outline. And as you continued with the utterances, continued with sound, frequency, and thought holograms being injected into the universal hologram, it would become dense and physical. Okay, we'll leave it there until we catch up with the golem in the next series. But I hope that really makes sense to you guys. I hope that if you don't believe it, you take time to think about it. You take time to read these sections. You take the time maybe to read my book and understand that it is not fake. It is not mythology. The science is real. Manifestation is a matter of manipulating energy, manipulating atoms. What you have been told is black magic, witchcraft, sorcery, is a negative spin on manipulating energy and atoms, which can just as easily always be used for good to essentially heal illness or disease, or just essentially anything that is meant to be used positively. So there's always a dichotomy. This world is based on a duality in all things. Up, down, good, evil, light, dark. So obviously good, bad is one of those things. And you can use these powers for positive things or negative things. The same way a knife can be used to either butter your toast, or you can use it to stab someone in the back. It's not the knife that's evil. It is the one that is wielding the knife and his intentions. All right, let's pick up now and finish this out. In other words, the technique of patterning recognizes the fact that since consciousness is the source of all reality, we know this is the God consciousness, infinite energy, energy in a state of infinity, and everything that is not energy in a state of infinity is confined energy, which has its own frequency or sound, which allows it to have form, individuality, and as a byproduct location. Our thoughts have the power to influence the development of reality in time-space as it applies to us, if those can be projected with adequate intensity. So this is what I explained to you, that you can inject your own thought hologram into the universal hologram if you have adequate intensity, meaning if your brain waves can be amplified to the point where it can successfully inject your hologram into the universal hologram instantly. And this is what the technology of the Montauk Chair was doing. It was a brain amplification piece of technology designed so that you can project your thoughts with adequate intensity. However, the more complicated the objective sought and the more radically it departs from our current reality, the more time the universal hologram will need to reorient our reality sphere to accommodate our desires. So basically, the farther it is from current reality, the more difficult it is to manifest, because the universal hologram has to essentially accept and entrain and reorient around the thought hologram you're injecting. So if it's something that essentially blends with the current reality seamlessly, it'll be easier to manifest, as opposed to, does this contradict reality completely, which is now going to be harder to manifest. Monroe trainers caution against attempting to force the pace of this process, because the individual could succeed in dislocating his existing reality with drastic consequences. Well, that's not good. You definitely don't want to do that. So what does this really mean, that you could dislocate your existence, your existing reality with drastic consequences? I don't really know. I don't know what they are actually referring to. Does this mean that you can wipe yourself out of reality? Does this mean you can get permanently lost outside of time-space? I don't actually know what they mean by this. I'll leave it to you guys to think about. It would be great if you want to comment on it in the comment section. Now, just like anyone else asked for, I'm a new channel. I need those likes, those subscriptions, those comments, those shares. If I have earned that from you in this video, I ask you to please do your part and do so. What I have just shared with you in this video is literally unknown by 99.9% of the world population. There are people that know. I'm not saying I'm the only one. I'm saying almost nobody knows. The top 0.1 of the 1% of black ops, black government projects would know. Very high level Kabbalists would know. People that are very enlightened and understand that we live in a holographic consciousness universe, the essential imagination of that infinite energy that is God, and where God is energy in a state of infinity, aka Ein Sof, which is the Kabbalistic term and name for God. The Hebrew term Ein Sof, meaning no end or infinite, is all potentiality, all things at all times in all places, because he is vibrating at infinity. And anything that is not vibrating at infinity, you, me, your computer, the universe, a mountain, a tree, this is confined energy to produce that form, to give it individuality and location. And if you truly understand this, then you would be more open-minded, and you may already know that your thoughts can produce reality, but you still were likely to not know the secret of instant manifestation, the secret to the science of creating the Golem, and the secret of the Montauk Project and the Montauk Chair, which, believe me, there are a lot more secrets regarding the Montauk Project and the Philadelphia experiments. And whenever I start to do my series on Al Bielek, which I plan to entitle The Legend of Al Bielek, who before he was known as Al Bielek was known as Edward Cameron, the brother of Duncan Cameron, who is probably one of the best whistleblowers that have come out of the Philadelphia experiment and Montauk Project, along with Phil Schneider, maybe some other people I'm not remembering right now, but those two really are the most well-known. Phil Schneider, Al Bielek, aka Ed Cameron, and even to a certain extent the individual Stuart Swedlow. But I'll be getting into that on its own series in the future. But the point is, no one knows what I just explained to you. If anyone ever heard of a golem, they think it is mythology and folklore. It is not. And it would not be in the Torah if it was fake, and it would not have a law against women practicing it if it were fake, and it would not be ordered that women needed to be murdered if it were fake. So I hope you guys can appreciate this information I'm bringing to you. Nobody else is willing to, is even aware of. Had this information been out there, was it in existence, I would not have bothered. The reason I wrote my book is because it didn't exist. And again, my book, Connect to Source, it compares the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, to this declassified CIA document, the Gateway Process, to interpret in modern scientific terms what the enigmatic, poetic, ancient Hebrew language of the Yetzirah is stating regarding A, the genesis of the universe, B, the creation of the golem. So thank you folks for joining me on this episode. This is seriously probably the most important episode I've done to date. And I hope that I've done enough to earn your subscription. And if you want to share the nature of reality with a friend or loved one, what a gift you can give, please go ahead and feel free to share it. If you have any questions for me, I am not someone who makes themselves unavailable. My contact information is in my all links description. My email is there. I also put it at the top of the comment section. You are free to shoot me an email. I will respond to you. I actually love hearing from people, which even though these are early days for me, I have already received this quote unquote fan mail of interested, like-minded people. So feel free to be in touch. Till next time, we will pick up with color breathing and energy bar tool and get into what this document was actually created for to begin with, which is remote viewing, which I'll probably do remote viewing as its own episode. But we'll pick up next time with color breathing. Thank you all. I appreciate you. Aleph Lev out.